Building an opening repertoire can be a complicated task, but I put some work into shortening this video and simplifying the main key points so that you can just get straight into building an efficient opening repertoire. Okay, so there's like two uh, approaches. Number one, you can limit your repertoire to only three openings. This would mean one opening for white, some sort of opening, and then one opening for black against e4, the king's pawn, and one opening for black against d4, the queen's pawn. And another approach is just to learn many openings, like 4 systems for white and 12 more for black, and just play many different openings. Okay, here's what I believe is the better approach. I believe you should do something in the middle. I believe you should have two repertoires, a normal repertoire and a backup repertoire. So a backup repertoire would be more open-ended, and it can be whatever you want it to be. This will include your surprise weapons and your one-game openings, maybe like King's Gambit or something like this you can include in your backup repertoire, or you can include more safe alternatives. For example, if your mainline repertoire consists of Ruy Lopez, then maybe your backup repertoire can be the Italian game with bishop c4. This is true for Maxime Vacher-Lagrave, the top #1 French player. He plays Ruy Lopez as his main opening and then Italian as like his backup. Anyway, so that's that. And this video will focus pretty much only on the first repertoire, the normal repertoire. For the normal repertoire, I concede that you should have 3 openings. One for white, one for black against e4, and then one for black against d4. For each of these openings, there are 3 criterias that Shereshevsky wrote about in his book Soviet Chess Conveyor. That's an interesting book, by the way, and I will put the link in the description. So the first criteria is you want your openings to be main lines. You want them to be sound, you want them to be respectable at the grandmaster level. Any openings which are second rate or even worse, they will lose its value once the surprise value is gone. And what I mean by second rate is like it's not as serious as a try, like maybe it doesn't play for an advantage for white, or maybe it doesn't play for equality for black. Okay, so that's criteria number 1, but here's an example of a first-rate opening that would be recommendable for white. The open Sicilian for white, okay? And then, after the Najdorf, play bishop d5. This would be recommendable. It's a main line. It's the most popular way to fight the Najdorf. It's probably the best move, actually. And very sharp opening that follows the principles, which transitions me naturally to the second criteria that Shereshevsky talks about. Criteria number 2, your openings should be practical. They should be so that you can follow the principles and still get healthy positions. Your openings should enable you to apply the concepts of opening philosophy that I discussed in my first 2 videos of beginner course. You should just be able to follow the principles of developing towards the center and getting your king into safety, using tempo, and exploiting development advantages in the game early. You should be able to follow these concepts and get a good position. This is not so easy to do in many openings that are impractical, such as the Grunfeld. The Grunfeld here is a good opening for black. However, it's impractical in the sense that white has a million replies, and a lot of those replies can be very dangerous, and it's also kind of like white can makes a draw. He can make a draw if he wants to draw. So you don't want that. And that actually transitions me to the third criteria. Your opening should lead to middle games that allow both players to play for all three results: a win, a draw, or a loss. Your opening should make it so that whoever is the better player will win. The reason for this is that not only can you play for all three results, but it will also teach you a great deal of strategy and other concepts of chess middle games. This will serve you greatly for the years to come, and the Grunfeld will not do so good at that because white can play for a win or for a draw, basically for two results and some of the variations if he wants to. And it's a complicated opening. So this Grunfeld opening for black I would not recommend because it follows criteria number 1, which is it's a sound mainline, respectable at the grandmaster level, and very healthy theoretically. However, it doesn't satisfy points 2 or 3, being practical or being a position where you can play for all results and make your life easier. Okay, so that's that, and now I guess it's time to give some examples of openings that you can play yourself. But actually, I just want to illustrate one more example, which is the c3 Sicilian. I was talking about how you should stick with the open Sicilian with knight to f3 if you want to build a normal repertoire. A move like c3 would be a second-rate opening. It would not be as ambitious for playing for an advantage. In practice, black has no troubles equalizing this position. Both knight f6 and d5 are good replies. Even moves like e6 is also a good reply. In fact, I play this for black. I play e6 here, and after they go d4, I just play d5, they take, and I take. And I'm willing to get this structure for black, and it's pretty healthy. The c3 Sicilian is an opening that has some surprise value. However, over time in your professional chess career, it will actually lose its surprise value. So you don't want that. You want openings where they're so good that even if your opponent studies it very deeply, it gives you an opportunity to play for a win. Okay, now time to just throw in some recommendations for white. For white, I would recommend you either start with e4 or you start with d4. E4 is better for teaching tactics and also teaching making efficient use of your time. D4, on the other hand, is better for teaching strategy and better for teaching planning, I guess. It's up to you which you want to choose. If you want to be a D4 player, then I recommend you stick with the Queen's Gambit and all the main lines. This is a Queen's Gambit. Now, if they don't go D5, but they go something like Knight F6, then play C4. So basically, be a Queen's Gambit styled player. If you are a Queen's Pawn player, it's probably harder to study than E4 because the routes in E4 are more narrow. There's less choices that are complicated, whereas in D4, black can do Dutch, he can do King's Indian, he can do the Grunfeld, he can do modern Benoni or Benko, he can do Slav, semi-Slav, Chebenenko Slav. There's a lot of openings. Okay. So because of that, I would slightly prefer to recommend E4 and stick with this kind of opening. Here, I would recommend sticking with the Ruy Lopez, actually. I think in the long-term development as you a player, it's going to benefit you more to play Ruy Lopez instead of Italian or Scotch. Yes, you can incorporate like Italian or Scotch in your backup repertoire. But for normal repertoire, I think that the Ruy Lopez hits the heart of chess. It best follows the three criterias. Allows you to play principal chess and get good positions. It's a main line, it's highly respectable, it's been played since forever. And finally, it's not a one-dimensional opening, so something about the middle game will be different every game, and it will teach you something new every game. So, okay, now finally, okay, for the black side, opening recommendations against e4. I can suggest two, e5 or the Caro-Kann. Also Sicilian, okay, Sicilian is really good, but it's really hard to learn. It's highly theoretical. But maybe it's another good recommendation for beginners who want to put more work in the opening. It's really up to you. If you have no preference, then I would say stick with e5. I think this is the smartest choice, just to stick with e5, especially if you are an e4 player, because a lot of people play e5 here as black, and if you play e5, then you will learn both sides of, say, the Ruy Lopez. Here you can play the black side and the white side. I think this is smart. Here I would recommend systems based around a6, but other moves like d6 or knight f6 are okay. Uh, I would not recommend a move like bishop c5 because in the first video I talk about how it is desirable for white to build up a pawn center based around c3 and d4. Bishop c5 only gives white some extra time to build up this setup. So after bishop c5, this is not a good move for black. White can just play c3 here, and after knight f6, just play d4. Also, he could take here and do the fork trick that I explained before, and white is winning the piece back in a comfortable manner. If black throws in a check, that's okay. We attack both the pieces anyway, and we kick the bishop. So, yes, I will say I think a6 is the smartest choice for black. And then finally, about black against d4, I can recommend like two smart choices. Actually, let's say three. First choice, maybe the easiest to play, is the Queen's Gambit declined. If you are a d4 player, then you can play both sides of this opening. This opening is very classical, hits the heart of chess, and it's kind of like all the other openings against d4 are going to be a different way of playing chess, more one-dimensional. So this is like the first priority recommendation for black against d4. You could also start it with knight f6. It actually doesn't really matter too much because you can play e6 and transpose. In fact, the knight f6 move order is pretty good because you can also play the Nimzo Indian, which leads me to the second opening recommendation. Nimzo Indian. It's very solid. It's actually so strong for black that white is avoiding it with knight f3 here instead in modern chess. But okay, knight c3 is not a bad move, and it's a very rich position, and it makes it so that whoever is the better chess player will win. Nimzo Indian idea is to basically control e4 for black, so now white cannot play e4 because you can simply take it. The knight is pinned because if the knight moves, then the bishop would take the king, so that's illegal. Okay. Finally, third recommendation would be the semi-Slav. This is maybe the hardest recommendation. And against the semi-Slav, you will see kind of like these positions. Okay, this move e6 denotes the semi-Slav. Here, white can just play e3, that's like the main line. But also, there's bishop g5. Here, I would recommend knight bd7. It's the uh, best way to play according to Shereshevsky's 3 criteria. It's sound, it's mainline, it's practical, and it's leads to non-scripted middle games. Middle games where it's not like either side is forcing a draw. Whereas in this line, it's extremely complicated, takes a lot of work after e4, and okay, this is called the semi-Slav Botvinnik. I would not recommend this for black. It's impractical, it takes a lot of work, and it's been analyzed very deeply, so deeply that white can basically force a draw if he wants. So, okay, this is my 2 cents for developing an opening repertoire, and I hope this helped you. Some other openings that I would not recommend, by the way, is like King's Indian. I would not suggest you play this way for black, just like how I would not suggest the Grunfeld. And I would not suggest any of the Benonis. I would not suggest the Benko Gambit because it's kind of a second-rate opening. It's not the best opening. I would also not suggest the modern Benoni for the same reason, but it's also kind of a different way of playing chess. I would not suggest like Budapest Gambit unless it's a backup opening maybe. Okay. Anyway, I hope this video helps, and I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to say. You can leave your comments about your 3 opening repertoire, and if you do, then I will give my opinion. And yes, so just to recap everything, okay, there's that 3 criteria. You need 2 repertoires. Okay, for normal repertoire, you want 3 openings total. Thank you. And for the next video, I will talk about some of the traps and stuff like that, and then after that, transition to middle games. Thank you.